this was, dude, right before. Okay, so here's a fun story. Right before we hit start recording, I was like, oh, here's some stuff we should mention at the top of the show, and then I completely forgot to mention any of that. But one of them is we don't know when the next episodes are going to be out, what our timing, what our schedule is going to be, any of that stuff. So follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok. I don't know if we have a TikTok. If we don't, that's Frunk's. He's leaving money on the table. Yeah.
Yeah, hit the subscribe too. Make sure.
Yeah, ring that wacky bell. But we'll let you know when the next episode's going to be through those channels as well. Also, check out the Patreon as well if you are interested in some good Patreon content. The PoddyC that we recorded last week, I think, was one of the all-timers, actually.
That was crazy.
Yeah. It was really good. Yeah. So do check that out. All right, it's episode 38 of the PoddyC. This week, I've shaved.
Wait, I didn't even notice that.
That's right.
Holy. Oh, I didn't notice that till right now.
Yeah.
Wow.
I have not.
Oh my god, you look so different.
I had enough, dude. I got some food in my mustache when I was eating, and I was like, this is stupid. That's I'm out of here. Yeah. Another news: there has been a dev interview done by none other than Liquid Limit Maximum, co-host of the PoddyC. So that was cool. There's some cool interview questions in there. I note as well, there was one question that you kind of fumbled, and you prefaced it by saying, this question comes from Dratnos. And then...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I wasn't a fan of that.
It seemed like you had a bumbly, stupid question.
Yeah. What was going on there?
I don't know. Okay, so when I do the interviews, sometimes I like to write out my questions ahead of time. But then if I straight up read all of it, it just sounds like I'm reading off a prompt, and it sounds really stupid to the listener. So what I do is I write it all out, and then I summarize it. I delete that, summarize it, and then ask the question, so it's actually me just speaking normally. So I did that with your question, and I knew what it was, but I kind of had to rephrase it, and I just messed it up. Sometimes the risk of doing that is sometimes you mess it up. And I did. And then I was like, this is what Dratnos thinks. And then I was like, whoa, so what about that? He was just like, what do you mean?
Yeah, it's all good, did shout out PoddyC.
Yeah, shout out
PoddyC multiple times.
3 times.
He said that he knew what mole people were, so that's pretty good.
That's good, because I'm not even sure I know what mole people are.
Yeah, that it's increasingly becoming misunderstood, and now it's just become synonymous with casual, which is not the point of what mole people is. Mole people are specifically casuals that we have not encountered yet, that are of a large population, but we don't usually hear from them. But that's fine. It just means casual now. You can't fight it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you know, you know.
Dude,
so, I do have something I want to. Oh, you go ahead.
No, perfect. Yeah, I was about to say, Dorki, you've got a meta soapbox.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, because it is tier list season, right? We're at that point in the week or month, I guess, where tier lists are really popular. And the question for today is Augmentation Evoker finally dead? And the reason I say this is because how we've been talking about how Aug's not going anywhere, that shit's gonna be the best by far. But we've actually been testing dungeons recently with 626 item level, which is actually really high gear. That's 2 of 6 myth track. And man, I don't know about Aug anymore, guys.
Really?
It's, yeah, I mean, I think its damage might just be too lackluster now for it to be worth playing. And we've also nerfed Demon Hunter tank, and yeah, I mean, it might just be the caster meta could possibly be dead. Now, I'm not saying it's gonna be gone for good, right? It's still probably gonna be really fucking good, if not still the best. But I think it's time to start questioning it. In fact, I was gonna say real quick, the Chinese community has been talking about how they might not even play AUG, because they've been playing a ton of beta keys, right? These guys go fucking hard on beta keys.
Did he do you see your thing?
No, yeah, I was you're gonna say Max. I was just.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Oh no.
Well,
okay, yeah, you go.
Oh, wait, do you?
No. It's.
I'll just.
Okay. Frank's gonna have really fun editing this. He's gonna edit this out.
Yeah, no. So, I remember saying this a while ago, where it's at some point the damage just isn't going to be worth the trade-off, and then that was always come back with, well, it's just too OP because it's so good for tank and healer. So I'm assuming the damage is such a big drop-off that how OP it is for a tank and healer potentially doesn't matter. It's that little.
So it's going to correlate with the interview question later, but it's also because the dungeons are actually so tight on the timer now. They've made it so that like we're actually fighting for the timer. They've reduced the timer on a lot of these dungeons. I think it was like 2 weeks ago, maybe it was last week. And we're actually playing these keys at like a reasonably high item level, so it's like realistic to what the keys will end up looking like.
Okay. Yeah, well,
Huh.
that makes sense. I mean, I mean, the community wants it. Like, I think they should go, even if like this isn't what it's going to be like forever. I think what needs to happen, just like some damage control from Blizzard's side, is just for sure intentionally make augmentation not good for one season. Just one. Just the first season of this expansion, because most of the delete this spec, delete this class, this was a huge mistake, never do this again. A lot of that just stems. Some of that is people being fundamentally against the whole support thing. They were against PI and all the issues with that. There is that. But part of it is it's just been meta since it's been released, and any class, when it's meta for too long, people want blood and they want it to be gone, right? And I think it's just been meta for long enough where they just need to make sure it's not for one season so people can go back to acting like normal humans about having like reasonable responses to things rather than like extremely aggressive responses to anything AUG related.
Yeah, it's really bad. I mean, even in your chat today, like when I was just like watching the interview, everyone was just spamming delete AUG, ask Morgan to remove AUG, and it just like was going really hard. And I honestly think they've struck a pretty good spot where AUG might not be the best pick. And if it is the best pick, it wouldn't be the best pick by much. So, like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
say like right now that like it's officially dead, it's gone. But it's like a quick PSA. Like, guys, don't worry so much about AUG. I swear it's like not that amazing. It's especially not good if you're playing these random comps, because like on beta we are kind of just playing random comps, right? Like maybe it'll benefit a lot more if you're playing specifically with Vengeance and specifically with Mage and specifically with another caster. But with these like random comps, which is what I would assume a lot of pugs are playing, like say they're just playing Augmentation, Pharaoh Druid, and like a Frost DK, it's probably not gonna do that great. You might struggle with timing the dungeon, especially with how tight the timers are now.
Well, that was so funny because in that interview, maybe we can kind of segue to some of the interview questions. That was an answer he gave. He was like, one thing we did in this expansion is that we made the timers much more lenient. To this was in response to me talking about how they added like the death timer in this expansion, and it's much more non-forgiving. It's a 15-second penalty instead of 5. So like the question I think was basically, are you concerned with, the just play to live and that's the only thing that matters meta, which has happened for the last bit of this expansion. Actually, I think like this entire expansion. And that is, he said that, well, that shouldn't really matter because we've made these more lenient, so the death timer should be. But I know you said in the chat, Dorky, that you didn't think that that was actually even true.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure on beta at least, it's been an all-time high depletion rate. Because like I've never seen beta keys depleted more than ever before, and it's like the patch is coming out soon, so it's not like it's some early alpha version of M plus. This is like kind of gonna be what we're gonna have, and
How much of that is the death timer?
I definitely want to say a lot of it. Like for sure, a lot of it is the death timer and dungeon familiarity, because like once players actually get good at the dungeons, right, and they know how to pull properly
Yeah,
and
that like exponentially
understand,
scales,
like yeah,
right?
that like 100%, yeah, it makes it so much easier time. But like I'm just looking at it from, especially from a pug POV, like if you're just doing these dungeons for the first time for like the first month or two, if not even 3 months, because we've been playing beta for like multiple months now, and we play a lot, right? Like we are playing fucking 12 hours a day. So I'm just imagining someone who's probably done these dungeons like a dozen of times. They're probably still gonna struggle a ton with these dungeons, and the deaths are super punishing. I don't know if anyone on beta has been like receiving this positively, but I mean, Morgan did say that like they think it's gonna be lenient on time, which
Yeah,
is
but I mean, if that's not the
maybe
case,
maybe
they can
there's.
just. He also said
Yeah,
that
they
they'll
can change
reduce
it,
it.
right? Yeah,
He said.
yeah. I
He
mean,
said.
that's what made it promising. Like he said, they might reduce the timer instead, and like instead of like the
Yeah,
death timers.
that was really interesting. That's the JB cook for a really long time? Like maybe the idea at a certain key level is not to like punish you with deaths. It's more to like we're just gonna each key level is gonna reduce the time you have to work with the key or something like that as a way to do that. He didn't super delve into this. He was just like that's something we'd talked about, and he also said that if the death timer is too extreme, we can just simply nerf it, right? Like if we have our eye on that. So like I think that got covered. I brought up a few things about Mythic Plus in that, and he seemed I just didn't know if the timer thing was actually accurate, but I know that sometimes it's hard to tell between like another part of the community and then the way that people like us are doing the keys. But I know that it's going to seem way worse on beta. If the death timer is a new thing, 15 seconds off death timers, and people are learning the dungeons, or they're certainly way less familiar than they will be during the season, you're dying more, and those deaths are 3 times more punishing. So right at the beginning, it's going to seem super punishing. But even in the season, what's like the key that everyone strives for, right? It's the 10. That's the key that gives you the portals. This is not a high key thing. This is what the average Mythic Pluser, this is the pinnacle goal of the season and what a lot of them go for and then stop. It's also the thing that drops aspect crests. That's going to exist. The triple death penalty thing exists on a 10, right? It starts at a 7?
Yep.
So
7.
that what might be a talking point in the expansion that maybe we can hold off for now might be getting the portals might be significantly harder than it ever has been because of that inclusion.
Oh, I mean, I think it's 100% going to be harder. I mean, not just because of the death penalty, but also because it's the first time we're having this new set of affixes and we're doing Season 1 dungeons. Because Season 1 is generally harder. You know how like dungeons levels get higher throughout the expansion. So first expansion or first season, it's definitely going to be really tough. And I mean, pug groups are just going to get absolutely rolled, which is fine. I mean, there's got to be some challenge, right? And I think a lot of people who are chasing for that plus 10 key, it'll be fun if they're enjoying the process.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dorky. Going back to the AUG point of like, I feel like that closest Clutchmates nerf has taken it out of the M plus like super duper importance range. This could just be my guild being bad at math, but I'm a little bit worried about like 4 AUGs being a raid thing, which because it seems like the closest Clutchmates thing, which doesn't affect them in raid, and the damage there still either our math is bad or it's still very good. So, which both of those possibilities are very real. So I don't know. That's something I'm sure we could talk about. I'm looking forward to after the race, and we could talk about what everything was looking like during this, and Max could actually answer because of course
normally
no comment.
I would normally chime in, but I can't do that.
Of course.
Yeah, you can't leak.
Yeah.
I mean, they were popping off before the closest clutchmate thing, like I've said in previous podcasts. So I do think there is a possibility of it being OP in raid.
Yeah, I mean, it should be twice as good as it is in dungeons, right? It's buffing double the amount of DPS, not accounting for their personal damage, which is a bit higher. But yeah, who knows? AUG sucks, or maybe it's great. Who knows? It's less good in dungeons. What were some of the things during the interview that Morgan had that stuck out to you guys?
Ooh, I think the big one was the crest reduction for your alts. So what exactly did Morgan say? Because I mean, this struck big time for me.
Yeah, so I asked him, this was probably been my biggest complaint about the upgrade system, and it has directly affected how much I have played both Season 2 and Season 3. If anyone in this chat is aware of this feeling where you like play your main, maybe for a few weeks, maybe you didn't start your alt yet, but then like 3 or 4 weeks into a season maybe, or longer, you're like, man, I really want to play this thing. It looks really good. It sounds really fun. And then you log on, you get like your initial set of gear, and then you're like staring down the barrel of like 100 dungeons to get caught up to the aspect crest and worm crest number. And then you're like, wow, that's crazy. That is enough for me to maybe not want to play this character because that road is so long. And then so a criticism that's there for a while is that there should be some kind of catch-up system. So I asked him directly about that, and then he kind of announced during the interview, they haven't announced it officially yet, but they're planning on having the way he described it was kind of interesting, but it sounded like if your main has done something, your alt, and either there's unlockable achievements. Do you guys know if there's achievements that you get
Yeah.
on the way up to like full
Yeah, it's
mythic
like
track?
dreaming of drakes when you're finished with your Drake's Crest or whatever was the ones in Dragonflight, and like, yeah.
Yes. So when you get that and you're done with Worm's Crest on your main, you officially have upgraded everything past what Worm's Crest can help you with. Your alts now, when upgrading with Worm Crests, will have a 30% reduction for the amount of crests it takes to upgrade. So while earning them is still takes just as long as it took to earn on your main, it will you will have a reduction, and it'll take you less long to upgrade them all to full. And also you can you also potentially like well, you wouldn't be able to slingshot your main because well you kind of could.
You could.
You definitely could.
But so the problem with it is that you could pretty feasibly slingshot the levels of crests that don't matter anyways. Like those first two bottom levels, those are never limiting resources for you. To get to a point where you didn't need the Worm's Crest equivalent, especially because they've upped how far the hero track goes this time, it's not something you could feasibly do in the first few weeks, which would be when that would be abusable. But I do think there is some concern, depending on the implementation. If they implement it such that it reduces cost rather than increasing gains for your alts, that does create a little bit of an incentive for your alts where it's like, oh, I should save these Worm's Crests until my main gets me to the Worm's Crest discount. And that could also potentially be a main thing you could... I don't think it's really feasible that this would happen in the first few months. I think you would do this with your main helping your alts rather than like some really degen way of your alts helping your main, which is a really big thing to avoid.
Blizzard ever sniffed out the solution to this was doing some shit on your alts before your main so you could do some crazy main stuff, they would immediately change it.
But hold on. I don't get it, because like, wouldn't you just be done with that crest if you're trying to discount it?
Yeah, but if you can get it on your alt first, then you'd have more. I guess that's true. Yeah, it wouldn't be.
Well, yeah, I mean, you would just have more of that useless crest though, right? Like,
which I guess
change anything, right?
Unless you want to make some enchanted worms or enchanted, which making some pre-enchanted worms would be some value, but it would be mostly the biggest downside would be if they implement it such that it's a cost reduction rather than a gain increase, that you would sit on your worms on your alt.
It's definitely going to be a cost reduction.
Right. So you're going to sit on your worms on your alts until your main is done with worms, so that you can spend fewer of them right on your alts and need less of them, right? Which I think that's probably bad.
It's not the end of the world. I mean,
it would probably be better if it was implemented as a gains increase rather than
overall a good thing.
Yeah. This is like a minor
very much a good thing. Yeah, this is a minor like niche thing. Generally speaking, this is. I mean, I absolutely would have played those characters if I was staring down the barrel and it's like, oh, this will actually be 30% less. Like every single dungeon, right? It wasn't it before. It's like you had to do 2.5 aspect dungeons to get one upgrade. Is that what it was?
If you depleted them, you needed 3.
Yeah. Depends on how it
if you timed it, it was 12 out of 15 for
one run.
Yeah.
Like
each runner gave you 12 and you needed 15.
But now with the 30% reduction,
it would be one
per.
Actually
get one upgrade per, which I think would feel like really good, right?
Yeah. 100%. I think it's great.
Yeah, I feel vindicated by this because, like, you know, a bunch of people were like, oh, but, you know, everyone loves grinding 50,000 dungeons on their alts, and, like, Dorki has no idea what the hell he's talking about, and that's not how people play the game. And then, you know, I have this argument with Yumi TV2. First of all, get fucked, Yumi TV.
TV2? He's got a second one?
We're the best.
That's
okay. Yeah, but either way, you know, because, like, he was having this, like, conversation on his stream, and I was arguing with him. He was like, oh, you know, like, not everyone is Dorki, where like people want to just have alts that can like do high keys. Like people just want to grind alts all day, and I'm like, man, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people like that, but that's not everyone. And for Morgan Day to just come out and be like, oh, you know, like it's problematic that there are so many tracks you got to go through. Yeah,
like there's nothing. But it's not like
it's more about like, you know, they want a longer path is like kind of the arguments, but I'm glad for shortening that path.
That's crazy.
Because that was a complaint.
The path being shorter is a crazy complaint. Like, I mean, you could play another alt or whatever, and it's not like rewards impact and can kind of lead you in a direction of what should be good gameplay, and you're doing it for the gameplay and the rewards, right? But it's not like as soon as the rewards stop, you're like, I just don't want to play this character forever, right? Like, there's a world where it's like, okay, now I have this shiny character that is maxed out as good as it can be, and I want to play it a little bit. That's not just for high-end people. I think people who play at a low level are also like, my character's super geared, I want to own, right? I think I'm going to do really well. But I mean, I kind of see that, but that's just saying the only reason you're playing the game is because of the carrot on the stick of a potential upgrade, and anytime there's no upgrade, you're just like, I'm never going to play. And I don't think that's
there
true
are
for
a lot of people who make that argument.
I think that is a... I mean, I'm certainly not going to say no one exists like that. That sounds like a pretty small minority where the only thing you're playing for is an upgrade, right?
So a counter argument I've seen to kind of celebrating this change is, well, Blizzard added 2 new rows to the myth track. So if you look at how far an alt has to go, you know, if you have to get 6 upgrades in the myth track, but 30% faster versus 4 upgrades in the myth track last season, like it's kind of the same length.
Yeah, it just depends on how much the reduction or boost is going to be.
They said, 30% is what they're thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, if it's actually going to be 30%, it's still going to be a longer track.
Yeah, but it's not always, at least when I was doing it, it wasn't always, okay, my main is done. I am at max myth upgrade track on every item. I'm now playing my alt. It'll be like my main is,
right,
you know, probably like 3 or 4 weeks of aspect crest from being done or more, and my alt is still not getting to where the point it wants to be at, right? Like, so maybe when you're looking at it purely from like, I'm all the way done 6 out of 6 mythic, now I'm starting an alt from fresh, with a 30% reduction, it'll be the same time as it was this patch. But really, you're not looking at the end of the road, you're looking at multiple spots through the road where it will always be shorter still.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree. Like, I think that the getting an alt to a point where it feels good is the thing that needs to be a road that isn't too long, rather than getting an alt to like done fully 100% done. Although I think that,
well, but the Warbound gear helps with that, right?
Yeah, the Warbound gear helps a lot. That helps so much at the start of the process too. That's gonna be really sick if they stick the landing on how much Warbound gear you get. That could be like the biggest thing that gets people into alts and having fun on them.
How much do you think that's going to drop? Like they keep mentioning Warbound. We call them WOOO gear. Warbound until equipped. Calling it WUE sounds horrible. So like, let's just say you kill the first boss on Mythic. Like, is it something you're rolling on? Is it personal looted? If you have 20 people in a raid, are 5 of them getting a Warbound until equip item? That's a lower. It's on the lower track. It's not a Mythic track, and off a Mythic boss, it would be like on a heroic track. But like, I think it would need to be a fair, large amount of quantity, unless you can buy them on the auction house. Is it going to replace BOEs, for example? Like, I don't really know exactly what the context of these items are.
I think it's dropped for me during testing. Like when we killed some bosses during testing, I think I got some WOO gear, which obviously is like a small sample size, but it's like 1 track below the whatever you're doing. So if you're doing heroic raid, you're going to get champion track WOO gear, and it seemed like it was dropping a reasonable, like every boss would drop like 1 or 2 pieces for somebody in the raid.
Was it raid loot? Was it
no, it's
specifically
personal loot to
raid?
somebody.
Yeah,
and they're like different items. They're different items than...
Oh, they're not the items from the raid. They are like placeholder items almost.
Yeah, there's like, you know, you'll get like and it could be any armor type, any weapon type as well. And then it's like on the lower track. And
wait, hold on. Can this have implications for like trading stuff to your main?
Not really, because
it's a lower track.
Yeah, like you could get champion track gear out of heroic. So like, you found a way to get champion track gear to your main. Congratulations, you can get hero track gear from Mythic Plus, right? Like, what are we doing here?
Wait, what if you do Mythic splits and then you
get a hero track WOO gear
to your which is to your mains, or quote unquote.
So you do a bunch of Mythic splits of the easy bosses, and then you send all of the heroic gear, in which good guilds are already fully capped out on at that point because of Mythic Plus spamming. It's just I see the world. It's just not. If Mythic dropped Mythic WOO gear, that would be potentially exploitable, and maybe that's one of the reasons why it definitely doesn't do that.
Yeah. In theory, even if it dropped like hero 4 out of 6 gear, you could maybe come up with some like... But it's just not going to be time efficient. Like, there's no way that those 3 hours are a worthy 3 hours, even for Ace World First guilds, and that trade-off gets exponentially worse as you get in the lower ranked guilds from that. But it is definitely something worth asking that question for any new loot system, for sure.
I could see it dropping so infrequently too that it doesn't actually, like, I think the idea is it drops, it's kind of rare, and you're like, oh, that's nice. Oh, I got a caster weapon. Oh, I was thinking about leveling a caster. Oh, that's sweet. I have a heroic caster weapon now to start with. That's sweet. Like, I think it's actually going to have a pretty good impact on the game. You know, it's not like I'm gonna wait to log on my ult until I have a full set of cloth gear. That's probably like really, really unlikely, not feasible, right? But like it's just like little pieces that help. But if you're someone who's playing at pretty much the high end, I think Warbound until equipped gear might not really have much of an effect on you at all. Like I think this is definitely aimed at a like more casual audience for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think like I'm gonna be rating heroic and mythic on tanks and stuff, and then it's gonna drop like if the first WOO gear that drops for me is an int staff, like that'll probably affect my first for fun ult being an int staff user rather than say a agi fist.
It's only a
weapon.
heroic staff though. Couldn't you just like
Yeah, but-
farm a heroic weapon from Mythic Plus? You'd
Yeah, but
probably
who wants to do that, right? Like on their fresh alt, it's like, hey, you can start with a heroic piece, a heroic weapon, right? Like that's, I don't know. To me, that's like enough of a tiebreaker that would affect what that would be something where it's like, okay, this is a reason for me to do my ult. If it's a weapon,
would be
yeah.
a tiebreaker. Maybe. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. Like my rats, I'll play all the rats eventually, but the one that I'll do first will probably be whatever one has the best WOO gear available to it.
Dratnos.
Yeah.
Damn. Well, with that announcement though, I definitely think that was like the final thing I needed for warbands to feel awesome was that Crest thing. So I feel like warbands are really shaping up to be, and this is also, if you guys are listening to this, this is I think the last episode we'll have before early access is out.
Yes.
Yeah, this will be your last episode of Dragonflight. So see you guys
Yeah.
until next expansion.
Okay, well, speaking of that, we got to talk kind of about one thing I talked to Morgan about was raid buffs' impact on Mythic Plus, and how basically the phrase of the question is, raid buffs are supposed to be something that in raid you want one of every class, but ideally maybe not much more powerful than that, because then it can kind of determine the Mythic Plus meta. And I just turned it around and asked it, like, how do you handle the power of raid buffs and if that can affect a Mythic Plus meta? And then also talked a little bit about DK raid buffs. What was your all's opinion of that answer? He basically said, like, there's going to be a meta in every game, obviously something that we know, but he's like, that really only affects the high end. So basically he was like, we don't give a fuck, I think was kind of the...
Well, I didn't understand the DK part because he can we go over that first? The DK part
Well, we can, yeah. So basically, we finished that question up, and then we had talked about how previously enhanced shamans were the only shaman that like had something that you wanted in a raid, and the other two didn't. So they changed that and gave them Sky Fury Totem. It's a nice mastery buff, and they gave all of them a raid-wide Wind Fury, which is super powerful. And they addressed that problem. And then I just pointed out how DKs currently have that problem because in a raid, they like Blizzard hasn't even acknowledged that like their ability to grip things, and they designed fights with ads that need to be gripped, and only DKs can really sufficiently do that. That is kind of their raid buff, similar to how Warlock's raid buff. They don't have an hour-long buff they give you. They have Hellstones and Gateways, but you need that just as much as you need Fortitude, right? So you end up bringing a Warlock. DK's only argument for a raid buff, and they would actually be the only class I believe in the game that doesn't like have one officially, is grip. And I just pointed out how they just changed it with enhance, right? Like they noticed that one spec of shaman gave you something really powerful and the other ones really didn't, and then they made a change because of that. But DKs have the same problem, right? Like grips are what you bring a DK for, but blood DK brings a significantly better grip. They're pound for pound are probably twice as good as a DPS DK.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that you can hold grippy hands without it being like griefing. Whereas
that's less true now because they made it less of like an offensive cooldown.
That's
so
true.
like I don't think you care about that as much as a DPS DK. But yeah, it's like they have mass grip, and they have, maybe even more importantly, a very low cooldown single grip, which is what you utilize on a lot of fights. And usually it's very rare you actually need mass grip on a fight. It's usually that just the single grips are really good, and having the short cooldown single grip is super OP for it to recharge in time, since it's a 2-charge thing. And their response to that was definitely interesting. It seemed like they kind of what did you guys think of the answer? They kind of like bounced around it. They didn't really give a lot of insight.
That's what I didn't understand. Like, I wasn't too sure what he was getting at when he was saying how like.
It almost sounded like what I was trying to get across was, I think if you're gonna do that for Ellie and Resto Shaman,
might as well do for DK, right?
maybe DPS DK needs mass grip and a shorter grip cooldown. I don't know how that would affect PvP. I think that's, if I'm gonna guess, that's why they don't have that for Arena. But that was kind of what I was at. And then the way he kind of made it sound like he's like, so you want me to nerf blood DK? It's like, not really. I just think that it should be
just make the DPS DK better.
Yeah, just make it so it's the same for all 3 specs, just like you did with Shaman. And I don't think the answer was that was one of the answers I didn't really like the answer too much of the answer to.
Yeah, it's tough to like draw the line between like where are the things where it's like, oh, this is something cool that makes this spec good versus like, oh, this is something that means the other specs are like always playing from behind when it comes to competing for a raid spot because like they don't have it.
Yeah,
I think they see Blood DK's grip suite as not in that bad category, but in the good one. But we see it as in the bad one.
we absolutely see it in the bad category of it is so much better. I mean, I can tell you from my perspective, I know like my perspective of how precise we are on comps is not needed across the entirety of the game, but with raid buffs pretty much only being needed in Mythic, right? They don't tune Heroic for you needing raid buffs. They tune Mythic for you absolutely needing all of the raid buffs. Like you would, if you are going to a fight, it is never like, oh, you need grips here. It is never like how many DPS DKs we bring. It is you bring a blood DK. That's the answer. And if you need any other grips, the answer before bring a DPS DK, unless they happen to be extremely overtuned, which again is kind of fighting the same battle that everyone else is for those last few spots. The answer is actually to bring a second blood DK and bring the buff from another melee. And then it is bring DPS DK. And that doesn't seem right, right? Like the other classes aren't doing that.
Yeah.
So maybe I didn't make that extremely clear. But yeah, I wasn't a huge fan.
Yeah, Morgan Day did seem to make it sound like DPS DKs were worth bringing. I don't remember how he phrased it exactly, but he mentioned that like the beginning of the question where he asked you the question afterwards.
Yeah, he did. He mentioned like, oh, well, they have AMZ and they have all these other reasons you bring them to raid. Well, Blood has AMZ as well, and it's actually better. It has a higher cap for some reason because it scales off of their HP. Again, another reason why you wouldn't bring one over the other. I'm just saying it's something that where you prefer one spec over the others, and that's not true of like almost any class in the game that has a raid buff. So it's just weird that it still exists. But maybe he can go off some statistics. Like I think DPS DKs have been brought to 4 of the last 6 end bosses as far as world first and world second kills. So they weren't brought on Fyrak, but they were on Razageth, they were on Sarkareth, they weren't on Jailer, they were on Sylvanas, and they were many of them were brought on Denathrius, right? So like if you look historically, DPS DKs end up being brought. The unfortunate part of that is none of that is because of the difference between Blood or DPS DK. It is because they happen to be extremely well tuned DPS wise in all of those raids. Yep. And if that wasn't true, you would not have brought them. So it's, I don't know. Probably don't have to spend too much more time on it. It's just something that didn't really get sent across. And maybe they think it's fine the way it is. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. That's just kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like the small quote unquote thing that will stay with DK forever is their tankiness. Like I guess that's something nice about them. But again, like that is
for a DPS. Yeah, their
for
tankiness
DPS
as a damage player is quite significant.
It's insane. Expansion. Yeah, but I think
good.
Going back into like the M plus part of the question, it definitely affects DK by far the most. I mean, like after Shamans got their buff, it's like man, DKs are just really down bad now because like the grips. Like you said, they design a lot of these fights with grip in mind, but for M+, it's like, what the hell are you going to use grip for, really? You don't really need grips at all. And
yeah, grips is just another form of stops. Like, grips in Raid can do something that no one else can do, but grips in a dungeon pack is the exact same as a single target stun like Hodge or Stormbolt, or the same as a knockback like Typhoon or Wing Buffet or Tail Sweep or just any of those things, right? It's the same as all random CCs, where in Raid that's not true.
There are a few spots in dungeons where it's nice, right? Like Nokud, you're just like, oh hell yeah, right? Grip those archers in.
Nice is like it's a luxury. Like
yeah,
you don't
of every other
whatsoever.
buff in the game besides Hunter,
sure, yeah.
Like it's so
if you have Mark of the Wild, it's nowhere close to Mark of the Wild. It's nowhere close to Fort. It's nowhere close to Devotion Aura. It's nowhere close to even like Warlock's Hellstones in dungeons. It's nowhere close to how good that is, right? Like like every other form of Ray buff, even the ones that aren't the conventional ones, have value. And you're like, oh shit, we have gateways. That's crazy. We can do something we don't normally do. Like DKs don't. They're the only class in the game that doesn't have that thing for sure. Maybe Evokers actually even though I think they just have Evokers have kind of always been an amalgamation. Evokers just are an amalgamation of a bunch of different utility things. Like when you're getting Evoker, you're getting that extra dispel, you're getting the rescue, you're getting the Zephyr, you're getting the. There's just so many total tools that make it up, and probably the least valuable of which is actually their 60-minute raid buff. It's like almost irrelevant, actually.
That is the most fake raid buff, but it doesn't. It's like all the other stuff they do is so much that it doesn't matter. Yeah, I thought it was a really good interview though. Like overall, I felt like the candor that he had as well was
oh, he's an nice. Awesome interview.
Yeah,
he's really good. Yeah,
that's
Morgan Day. I mean, Morgan Day was.
Yeah, he
was
like,
really in touch.
I've never spoken to Morgan or Ian ever, and then left that conversation being like, I don't think they get it. The people who majorly run the game we play, where I'm like, oh, they just don't understand. Like I think they're like way smarter than all of us actually. After speaking to them for a long time, so
the bar is quite low.
Yeah. At least everyone on this podcast, the bar is as low as it could be. But I would say, significantly more intelligent. Something else they talked about too is one thing that was weird is they made those changes in season 4, right? Where dungeons are now like moved up, and heroic is the old Mythic 0. Mythic 0 is now a Mythic 10. But then we noticed in this new expansion, I asked him, how come the War Within Mythic Zeros, as opposed to like Season 4 Dragonflight when they made the change, are now actually LFR upgrade track instead of normal like it used to be. Which means that if you look at it and you skip Season 4 like a lot of people did, they basically made Mythic Zeros the same difficulty as what an old +10 used to be, but in turn didn't buff the rewards from it at all. It's giving you less rewards than delves, less rewards than normal raid. I guess they made it a daily lockout, but I don't even think Mythic Zeros will have any significance in gearing your character at all, even in the first week. I don't know. What was your all's thoughts about that?
Zeros would be bad, useless.
But like, do you think I think this is one thing he couldn't say in the interview, really, but something that I think is true. Is you're selling people on delves for the expansion.
Yo,
right?
100%. Oh yeah, like he was saying how like, oh, you know, they're doing this so that they don't make normal raid feel useless. But the reality is, delves make normal raid useless because you can get some damn good loot from delves in the first week.
Yeah, I think that
was
the goal.
100% the reason.
I think that's even probably the only reason there's a heroic week. Actually, if now listening to a couple of his other answers, I think the reason there's a heroic week is because there needs to be a week where like delves are the primary thing you're doing to acquire loot for most players in the game as the new thing you're doing. So you're going up the tiers, everyone's doing them together, and that's the main way you're getting upgrades outside of like the weekly lockout of heroic raid. And that's to me, I think, what it is. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, right? If you're really trying to show off delves, and I don't think he could answer that in the interview. Like he literally could not have given that answer that I just said. Yeah. So I think that's maybe more of that than anything else. But I wonder in the future, after delves have existed for a while, and there's no, like they mentioned, another thing we can talk about, there's no more heroic week after this season. They're going back to simultaneous release. They have to buff Mythic 0 for that season, right? Because Mythic 0 will be omega turbo worthless. Like literally, why is it even in the game in a season where there is no heroic week, right? So I feel like it is purely for this season thing, and it's a delve specific thing.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's gonna be good for the game. Like, I do think, as much as a lot of people seem to not like delves, I think it'll be fine for the game because, like, you know, it at least gives people a reason, a bit of a shove to do delves, and maybe people will end up enjoying them. Like, you know, I'm personally excited and looking forward to doing the first week or even 2 weeks of delves and just seeing what it's about. Like, I have completely not touched delves at all on beta, and I'm just like waiting for it to actually go live, and maybe it'll actually be good. Like maybe I'll actually enjoy it. I'm not gonna knock on it until I actually try it, and it's a finished product, of course.
I've actually had my tune change on that recently. I know like 3 weeks ago I was like, I've had enough. I've seen it. I really hope I'm wrong, but I think delves are just gonna stink. Like there's just nothing going on here. I like thought about it more, listened to some other takes actually, from some people that like don't play at this level, and I just for whatever reason now I have a feeling that like people are gonna be pretty pro delve.
Cool.
I don't know why.
People. So you're saying like we're all gonna become
not even
moles?
Not even moles. I just think like it's gonna be a refreshing thing. It's also going to be the only thing to do for a while, right?
I think it's definitely good for the game to do like a delve week, even if it's kind of forced, even if they have to do some, stuff behind the scenes to make it so
It's kind of a risk, isn't it? Like, can you imagine if like, because at least when season 1 hit last time, yeah, Mythic Plus was like, or like you could just kind of just start the season and just go. Like, it is kind of a risk. Like, they have to really believe in delves. If really all you can do is heroic raid and delve, and the delves don't hit, I don't even know. I think they might lose people before the next week comes around.
That'd be crazy. Well, I mean, is that true though? Because like they would still have the players subs and the season just begins. I don't know, but I mean, I do think it'll sour people's taste on delves if they are like forced to do it and they just end up not enjoying the experience whatsoever. I could definitely see that as well.
Yeah,
Well,
but
they're also not forced to do it, right?
Well, you know how people say like quote unquote forced. Like, everyone
Well, I
always
mean, like
feels
Torghast,
forced when
but we talk about Torghast, but Torghast was forcing you to do that because
no,
it
I don't
gave
mean
you
like
something you
that.
could literally never get from somewhere else,
Yeah.
and you needed it. That's not true of delves ever, right? Like,
I mean it
you
more
can
like
get
how you
fully
have to like,
geared without ever
you know how
stepping
people were
foot
saying
in
like
the
you
zone.
have to do rares in like the first week of Dragonflight, kind of
Yeah.
like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
but you
It
also,
is
but,
very
but
much
also
like that.
whoever said that was lying to you. Like that,
Yeah. Oh,
whoever said
100%. Yeah.
whoever said you have to do rares in the first week was making that up. Like,
But
no one had to do that.
By virtue of it being the best thing you can do with your time, there will be people who feel like they have to do it. And if those people also don't like it, and if they're also really annoying and stupid, then they're going to blame delves and say they really hate them and, be really annoying about it, right?
I mean, this kind of happened with the seeds in. You remember the seed farming thing in?
Oh yeah.
What was
I'm
it?
glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Blizzard took action against the filthy abusers of those seeds. Let me tell you, there was some crime going on there that honestly I don't think was punished harshly enough.
Yeah.
There was some degeneracy too. Like people were going hard on this seed grinding, where they were just like farming out that 5 rep per seed, I think it was, like just for hours on end. And I was doing it too on stream, right? Like I was doing it, and
Yeah.
just so many people were coming in. And they were like, "Why are you doing this? Like, do I have to do this?" And then, like it got to the point where I'm just like, "Yeah, you guys, if you guys don't do this, you're not gonna be able to play next week." Like I'm
You're
sorry
forever
to break
behind.
this to
Why
you,
did you
but, like,
do
yeah.
that?
Because
You're just lying to
it was
them.
just, I
just
mean,
got old?
I had to, man. We just kept like, look, you don't get it. You know how like when people just keep asking over and over and over, like, oh, what's the meta? What's the meta? It's like, all right, I'm fucking sick and tired of this shit. I'm just gonna troll the hell out of everyone.
Yeah, I respect it.
Yeah.
That's my villain arc.
Yeah.
But it was also funny.
Love it.
What are your all's thoughts about the? I think I understand how everyone, like most facets of the game, react to it, but the reaction to only season 1 having a heroic week, and that didn't even sound like it was a guess. It was like,
Yeah.
this is what's happening. This is only happening in season 1.
I think it is right. As somebody whose life is much better when there's a heroic week, I think that for most players, it's better not to do a heroic week if the heroic week means there's a week without M+, which I think that's just too...
Yeah, that's
icky.
maybe where I would step in. Why can't Mythic Plus exist
Yeah.
with a heroic week?
I agree. My favorite thing would be I'd love to see them experiment with a heroic week with an uncapped M+ during that week. I honestly just don't think it would be that
Like,
bad.
yeah, just to give I absolutely hated hearing that news. You could probably see it in the interview. My face was just like, oh my god, that's fucking terrible.
Yeah.
And,
that was funny.
and like obviously if you just care about raid, it's just like a less prepared raid. Tuning is not as good as it could be. It's just the quality is just worse. Like that week is really good, but also selfishly for the race viewership absolutely tanks without a heroic week. It is, people don't know when to tune in. They don't know when Mythic is starting. You're doing like a certain amount of days of splits, but no one really knows how many. And with a heroic week, Mythic comes out and you're just gaming, right? And that people know when to show up, and clearly that's been a complaint through all of this. So like we lose a lot of money. All my friends might lose their jobs. That's good by them making this decision, and then also like me personally, it's just not good. But I do understand that I think if it means for us to have a heroic week that Mythic Plus has to just be delayed, it is objectively bad for the game. It's even for PvE players, even for raiders. Like it's weird that that Mythic Plus is delayed. I just don't know why they're so married to the idea that a heroic week and Mythic Plus can't happen at the same time, which is my only copium for that.
What if you guys came to a truce, you and Echo, where you guys don't
The answer is it can't happen.
enter
Yeah,
Mythic?
there are
Just-
so many
just do
questions
it.
that start that way, and the answer is always you are stupid.
I'll
don't.
just stop you right there.
Just come
There's
to
no
a
point.
truce. Just do it.
Yeah.
But Yeah.
Why don't you guys who do your whole lives around trying to get world first take this action that makes you less likely to get world first?
Well,
Why
but
don't
you
you
know,
do
like
this?
it's a fair competition. You know,
Yeah.
just take the L. You guys just have to come to
Let's
an
let's all
agreement.
agree to do private auras, right?
Yeah.
Let's all just agree to handle
Okay,
private auras.
okay.
Well, let's
Speak
just-
Lulu,
It'll
I
work.
guess.
Just you guys just don't start for the first 13 hours, and then they also don't play during the reset as well. And then also, if either guild works on a bugged boss at all, the other guild, you pause until that's fixed.
You pause, yeah. So
Yeah.
Tindril lagged out for us for like 3
Right.
or 4 hours.
Every time
so-
that happens, we record how long that took, and then Echo takes that long.
Yeah, it's a
in
complete
a-
meme.
Yeah,
It'll
gentleman's
never happen.
agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
guys are
gentleman's
such-
agreement might be the biggest
well.
meme. Anytime that should, if I'm actually, dude, you know what? I'm gonna do this right now. My life will be so much better if I just ban the term gentleman's agreement in my Twitch chat, so I never have to read another stupid
Wait, do they
question.
actually say that?
People bring this up probably. I mean, every time someone starts talking about the race, a bunch of people just start asking about the race. Then everyone's just like, "Why not just do a gentleman's agreement?" Every time, no matter what follows that, it's a really fucking stupid question. They don't know that, but it's like wasting everyone's time, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, you need a what you can do if you don't want to ban the phrase. I have this in my chat where if anybody types the words like bag add-on, it auto ats them and is like, at this person, my bag add-on is Addy Bags, which I might be changing soon because they're not supporting it. But anyways, you could make one where it's like, at this person, it looks like you've said the word gentleman's agreement. Here's some, here's a link to a Google Doc that explains why every gentleman's agreement that's ever been suggested for the race to world first is not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's my only ask. Maybe it's too degenerate of a week. Maybe they feel like people will be so far behind. Maybe because they used to cap it at a +6 or a +7, and now it's below Mythic 0, that how would you even include Mythic Plus without it being, like, I think the thing they're afraid of is probably just having Heroic Raid not really matter. Right?
Yeah,
That's the
I think
reason
that's a
why
big
you would
part of
ever
it.
cap Mythic
That's
Plus.
what
But I
I'm
mean,
thinking too.
that happens in a simultaneous release, right? There's
No, it's
literally
I
no
think
difference.
it's more about like there's more of an arms race for the heroic raiders when there's only heroic week or there's only heroic raid out. They probably feel way more pressured because there's like nothing else to do. Because when
So would
Mythic
you want to
Raid is
add Mythic Plus
out,
then?
well, no, it's because they don't want to like be forced to have to like grind out Mythic Plus 2. You know how like there's a lot of raiders out there who complain about like, oh, like on the first week I just have to like grind Mythic Plus nonstop. But like with Mythic Raid, what usually happens is people will enter Heroic Raid and they'll clear whatever they can, and then they'll like jump into Mythic Raid afterwards, and maybe like do like the beginning of that. And I'm assuming that like part of it is they don't want players to feel pressured where there's no Mythic and they have to just like grind M plus outside of Heroic Raid.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like it seems like it would be worth trying for a season to see if it's actually bad, because I feel like it's one of those things where it's like there are these reasons that kind of sound logical for not having it, and I don't actually think it would play out that way. Like I think if they just did a season with a heroic week with M plus, it would be fine, and then we could just do that every time and it would be good.
Yeah, that's been my take for a while, but it sounds like they probably won't do that. So
Yeah.
we're gonna get the simultaneous release again, which is extremely sad for me, but all good. What else do they talk about in this interview?
There was a couple of interesting parts for M plus where they were talking about. I mean, they kind of just like avoided your question, or at least like maybe
When?
Morgan Day didn't understand your question about you were bringing up Crest and Depletion. Well, no, actually, no, it wasn't that. You were talking about
it was the
That
Dratnos
was
thing.
yeah,
It
that was the
more
question where it's
around-
like, hey, yeah,
I was thinking
Dratnos
about
asked
the
this
one after, but we
question.
can talk about that too.
Yeah.
Dratnos asked this question. What about that?
Any
I
comments?
any comment? Yeah, I basically said why the question was why penalize players with less crest for depleting a key. Right, there's already enough you deplete your key, you just depleted your key, right? You have a one less key. You've already received punishment. Are you potentially incentivizing players to not try harder content? Why doesn't it scale, right? If you're doing a 10 versus a 13 is going to take, I'm just going to make something up, like 20%, 30% longer. And you're even longer than that, I think, actually. And you're getting the same crest for doing something more difficult. Like, it wouldn't even be an argument about whether depletion should remove the amount of crests you do, because yes, that does prevent you from wanting to do harder content. But also, why doesn't harder content give you more crest, right? Why is doing a 10 the same as doing a 15? Not a huge question, but it's just how I related it was like, okay, you farmed +7 Maws back in Legion for the most optimal artifact power. For Azrite power in BFA, you farmed these grindy, meaningless islands forever, and it was a super easy thing. Like, is there just a world where something can scale in difficulty and give you better rewards, and it still, give you a reason to do actual real content rather than just spam the super easy thing over and over again? And the answer was not. I mean, maybe I don't think I asked it very well in the thing, as Dratnos keeps pointing out, but he did not really get. I think the answer was something like, you PoddyC people play this game at a really high level, and you don't understand that there's a lot of people who play at a lower level. And I'm like, okay, yeah, we know, right?
Well, but that was a multifaceted question. So, like, I think he was answering the depletion part more so than that part of the question.
To me, the part that just really sucks is, like, if you're a player who can time an 8 easily, can maybe time a 9, and a 10 is like a giga stretch goal for you, it just seems really sad to me that the game is incentivizing you to spam the 8s rather than try the 10s. Like that.
Yeah, agreed.
That seems like a blunder. Now, obviously, in this particular expansion, there's the crest change at 9 and 8, so maybe you do 9s instead, and it would be like a little bit harder. But basically, you want to do like the lowest level that gives you the acceptable rewards rather than the highest level that you can maybe do, right? And like, if there's something where it's like, oh yeah, we have a big chance of failing this, the game should be there being like, yeah, we'll try it, rather than like, yep, don't try that, go lower your key.
Yeah,
I do understand the depletion part though. Like, he was basically saying they want you to receive less crest for depleting, because like, if it rewarded the same amount of crest, then players probably wouldn't try as hard to time the key. Like, you might have players who just like show up and they're just here to finish the key so they can get the crest. But obviously, when you're joining a pug group, everyone joins a pug group for a different reason. Some people can join it for the score. Some people join it for KSM. Some people join it for gear. I don't really like how it's still like gonna reward 5 crests or some really bad amount for depletion. I think one idea I had is, what if they just doubled the amount of crests we get for timing the key, and made whatever we get now the amount of depleted keys. That way, like, it's effectively doing the same thing, but at least it won't seem as bad if they made that change, right? Like, if you just suddenly got 24 crests for timing a key, wow, I would guess that a lot of players are a lot more excited about that, even though like depletions are gonna make you get less crests. Or what if they just made it so that, like, if you invited dog shit specs, then you get more crests? Wow, that's like my
that would
best cook
involve
ever.
That would involve them having to identify which specs are dog shit.
It'll just go by popularity. It'll be like, oh, if you invite feral druids and this priest, then suddenly you just get like bonus 5 crests.
Oh yeah, there was something like that in the game. It used to give you like extra valor if you were getting points for the first time.
Yeah,
for someone.
I think you still get that. You still get bonus like flight stones, which will be
flight stones. I could have asked about flight stones.
Yeah,
maybe I didn't ask him about that. Do flight stones need to exist?
I gave you a question of embellishments suck. The flight stones suck could have been another good one.
Yeah. People are flaming me about not getting Dratnos' question across, but his other question was like,
embellishments
why do embellishments exist? Yeah. So embellishments suck. Would you like to give your thoughts on that?
It's not they suck as a system. It's like all the embellishments are uninteresting right now. I don't know. It's like.
Are you saying like it's weak, or it's just like?
Yeah, they're just also like not, like, my brain does not get tickled at all by the prospect of putting an embellishment on my character.
I don't think
like
embellishments
so boring.
Have really done anything for the game so far, other than Spore Cloak was a really cool decision. But like, besides just being a way for professions to be more relevant and making money and being a reason to craft something, like, other than that, they really haven't done much for the game. And
Season 2 was sick though. Like the Spore Cloak decision, that's what I want from embellishments. Like, I want there to be like, here's 2% more damage versus 30% more tankiness or whatever. Obviously, that was a particularly OP trade-off, but like a slightly more balanced version of that, I think, would be a really cool place for embellishments to be.
I mean, it's kind of hard to balance that, to be honest, because it feels like if they ever made the defensive value like not good enough, you always just go for the damage one.
Like, you would always go for the damage.
I mean, people do that with Spore Cloak. People didn't put Sporklog
Well,
on even after
Oh,
everybody knew it was OP.
I guarantee you they didn't. You know what that makes me think of? That makes me think in Shadowlands in season 1, back before you could change covenants all the time. Shadow Priests had a new sim come out that had Necrolord before they buffed Fleshcraft. It was like 0.5% better single target than Night Fae. And then you saw Shadow Priests in droves change out to lose movement from Soul Shape, which definitely made up that damage itself on any raid fight or any dungeon, anything.
Especially
right?
on a priest. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Because
they
it's
lost,
higher.
and they lost cheat death, and they lost the ability to also potentially like reduce other people's CDs as well. So just like the defensiveness, huge loss of mobility, not even a damage increase, and people will see something like 0.5% and just instantly be like, "Yep, that's it." Like the whole damage is everything with the player base. You have to like really hammer it in that it's a worthy trade-off to get anyone to buy into it.
Even cauterize too. When you had to talent into cauterize, people were like
Mm.
losing like what, a couple percent, like 2% damage.
Yeah, it's nowhere close to have a
And
cheat death.
yeah, it's just ridiculous. But like that's what I mean. But like you have to make defensive stuff like OP for people to actually consider taking the defensive option. But in Blizzard's eyes, it's not balanced. So
Do you remember last expansion when actually before the pre-patch this was true, where enhanced shamans had to drop spec points to take a leap, where moonkins had to lose spec points to take solar beam at the very beginning, where
yeah.
I think Havoc Demon Hunters to take Netherwalk or Fell Eruption had to lose spec point damage. I don't know how much each spec
Yeah.
point is worth of your damage, but it's probably 2 or 3% or close to that on average. Like they're really important, right? So that was tough, but we've moved on from those dark times.
All right. Was there anything else in the interview?
But yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of M plus parts that you guys talked about, and I found it interesting how Morgan Day brought up Beach's videos or whatever, and how he was talking about in some of these other games, you pull only up to like a certain point, and then there's like a door that stops you, and there's like a lot more player agency in World of Warcraft. He was just like taking
Which
low
is
key
true.
shots at
That's
other MMOs.
objectively
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
objectively
which is true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like he was saying how we just do M plus the best, and it's like
Yeah,
that is a fucking fact. Like that's why we
that
play
is a
M plus in
fact,
this game.
but here was the question. The question
But
was
yeah,
basically like, do you find it difficult to design for specific like what you want people to go through in a trash bag? Like when you make a raid boss, you design exactly the raid boss you want them to deal with. You can't just decide to like most of the time you can't decide to just like skip this or use a tail swipe and then now this boss mechanic doesn't work, right? They were like designed experiences. But in trash in this game, when you're making everything that can be stopped, how are you able to design an experience that you want people to go through? In a high level key, you're designing a pack that will do nothing because they're going to learn how to stop everything. But in a low level pack, you might be designing something that's just going to fucking annihilate all of them, right? And like I just asked them about the difference in like how they've gone through designing that, because also you've seen in this beta cycle they've made it so like things cast again if you don't interrupt them. Like if you just stop them, they'll just continue doing their cast. He gave an answer saying something like, well, every cast we should have better visuals. Dratnos keeps talking about how there's like casts like Super Giga Death Volley, right? And that's a very obvious cast. It's like it's very visual. You can tell that is going off. And he's like, we should be doing stuff like that for those casts, but maybe not for something like a Firebolt. I think it's more of like a high mythic plus thing, and I didn't really give a chance to give this rebuttal, but I think the issue, Dorki, is right. Like in a hierarchy, all of those casts are Super Giga Death Volleys, right? Like if you let the tank cast go off in a +7, you don't need to kick that. You need to kick the Super Giga You're Dead thing. But in a high key, if you let that fireball go off, your tank is definitely going to die because of like exponential scaling, right? So I think maybe it's something where it was like a high key specific thing, but it's more like stops matter so much more in high keys because every single cast actually will kill you.
so I found that answer kind of problematic for in the high key scenario, right? It's all right. High keys players will figure it out. They'll just like stop every single bolt, or otherwise it's gonna kill your team. But the problem is like for lower keys or pugs, it just basically becomes a healer mechanic. And the way they've been designing these dungeons is almost every single trash pack or like every single dungeon has a mob that does an AoE damage. It'll do like an AoE slam, or it'll put like a volley dot on every single player and you can't do anything about it. It's just like a mechanic; it can't be stopped. And then there are these mobs that are just spamming bolts on everyone. And in a pug scenario, like players are not good enough, or like not even good enough. They're not coordinated enough to be able to stop every single bolt, right? So it just essentially becomes a healer mechanic where you're expected to deal with crazy amounts of AoE damage on top of random bolts just firing away at your entire team. And that design has kind of plagued M Plus for, I want to say, like 2 expansions now. Like it's became a big thing from like Shadowlands to Dragonflight. And you see this in Ruby Life Pools. Ruby Life Pools is like the prime example of what these dungeons are like now. Upstairs of Inferno, guys, there's Inferno. It does a big, massive AoE damage. And then there are Cinder Bolts from the casters. Well, that's essentially going to be in like every single dungeon now. And to Morgan Day, he said it was like filler spells. Like that's supposed to be filler spells. But realistically, it just becomes another healer mechanic they have to deal with because there's no coordinated kicks in a pug scenario.
And that's maybe the weird part is they just spent some time in this expansion so far making sure there's a different experience for high key players and for people who are doing lower keys. But that's something that hasn't been addressed, is that those in like a lower key, like those casts going off, it is a healer mechanic, but it's fine. In a higher key, those casts going off is a healer mechanic and it's not able to be played around, and you have to stop them all, right? Like that is going to exist at some point. And I don't know how they in their so far they've been trying to design them differently. I don't know how you design that differently for High Mythic Plus. I don't know how you can do it for both.
Yeah.
I personally found it a bigger problem for lower keys actually. Like it's like kind of a problem for high keys, but like really it's the lower keys where it's a problem. Like I said, like high key players will figure out how to figure I got a cough real bad. Shit.
Go ahead.
They'll figure out how to deal with these mechanics. But people who are just out there pugging, like they're the ones who are really suffering. Because like I said, it's the combination of the mechanics from the lieutenants and the mobs that are just spamming filler abilities.
So they
also
Blizzard just doesn't understand how punishing the non-giga death volley things are that don't have animations to them. Like they just assume those casts kind of just can go off, but you're saying that even at a lower level, they're like extremely dangerous.
At the lower level, they do go off because they don't one-shot you, right? And that's more pressure on your healer. That was something that Megasite was saying last week, was like the hidden difficulty of things that one-shot you at high keys are kind of more dangerous than the low keys because they keep going. They actually go off, right? Or people sanding them when you just can't afford to in the high keys because they're going to die.
You know how healers always make that argument that like lower keys are actually harder than high keys as a healer, because like you have to deal with extra affixes when you're playing a plus 10 key versus a plus 12 key, because like when you're doing a plus 10 key you have to deal with these idiots on your team. Well, I mean, they always say that, the healers always say that, but like they're not being idiots, like people are using their kicks. It's just how that, like, if I kick and then someone else kicks, then like, we overlapped kicks, like we stepped on each other's foot, and that's going to happen when there's no communication. And that's just like a problem that commonly plagues pugs, and I feel like it's going to get even worse. And also, I just feel like the filler abilities, they add too much noise. I've always had this problem where it's like, okay, you enter the dungeon, and then if you're doing it for like the first 10 times, you probably have no idea what the hell these mobs are doing, and just like there's this mob casting Arcing Void, and there's another mob casting like Fire Bolts, whatever, and it's like, all right, which one am I supposed to kick? Like, am I supposed to kick like the
Well, they said that like they wanted to address that. Like that's like kind of in their own admission. If the noise is not cleared out by the super dangerous cast that is supposed to fuck you up, if that one isn't incredibly obvious either by name or by visuals or by sound or something, that is the thing that you really need to get, then they've erred, right? Like there shouldn't really be that much noise. You could have 10 mobs and 9 of them are casting Firebolt and one of them is casting that thing, and it should be extremely, according to them, it should be very obvious what you need to kick for you to not die. But you're just saying that that's not always the case.
In my experience, it hasn't felt that way, because I think it was like a couple of weeks ago, well, maybe it's been longer than that, where I talk about my first time doing these beta dungeons and how I just have no idea what's going on as like a first timer because there's just so much noise.
What were you gonna say, Dratnos? You were gonna add something to that.
Yeah.
Mine's after. Finish your bit there, Dorki. Because mine's kind of
I was just
tangent.
gonna say like I'm just not sure if other players will have this experience or not.
do
My
you say, John?
side tangent is again related to Megaset because she was the first person I saw suggesting this. Was they could make more mechanics that instead of like doing damage to you if you screw them up or if you let them go off, instead like reduce your damage dealt type thing, because then that's pressure that wouldn't land on the healers, and that could be maybe something that the filler abilities did
I've
more of
never
rather than
agreed
doing a
with
lot of
that.
damage.
It's kind of like the it's kind
That's
of like
deceptive.
the it's how Final Fantasy handles
Yeah,
mistakes.
it is a Final Fantasy mechanic apparently. Yeah, which
Yeah.
even
It's when
despite
you
that, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, well, even despite that, it was funny. We did kind of step over this and immediately started getting into the meat of the question, but it was funny how when Morgan Day initially answered this, he was like, "Just want to point out, y'all complain about dungeons, but like our dungeon, this isn't exactly
Yeah.
what he said or how he said it, but he was like, but you just guys need to know that our dungeons absolutely shit on every other MMO's dungeons, and he's not,
Not wrong,
He's
yeah.
he's not wrong at all. But he did kind of, and I'm not positive that's what he was trying to do, but it's definitely what he did.
He was definitely, dude.
Yeah, he was like every other dungeon, and you like get to a door, and then you kill this thing, and it opens, and I was like, oh Jesus Christ.
I mean, you got it, you flaunt it. That's fair, yeah.
He was not wrong.
Yeah, but for damage down thing, the problem is like it inherently creates more healing, and it essentially becomes a healer problem when the mob's living for longer, and it like another death bolt volley goes off, or like another lightning storm goes off because you couldn't kill the mob in time, or
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's less of a healer
Mortal
problem than
danger.
just
Yeah, I
blasting you for
definitely
damage
think-
up front.
Bro, I'm telling you right now, if you were going up to a pack and there was 4 casts that went off, and if those 4 casts went off, one thing was your entire group took a little bit of damage, and the other alternative is you and all of your other friends are going to do like 30% less damage if they go off.
and you're just fighting the pack for another 30 seconds.
Maybe, but those kicks have a higher chance of
Right,
getting
people
stopped.
actually, like, DPS players are being affected
Oh,
by it, so
okay,
they'll
so
actually...
100%.
Like, we have a little bit of this, right, with the demo shouts and Halls of Infusion and Dragonflight, right? Like, those are...
Right.
That's a damage down cast, right? And I think that area you pull really big in because you can, right? And it's like, if you let one of them off, it doesn't wipe you, and it's just like, oh, this...
The
oops,
problem
right? Like,
with damage
as a
down-
DPS, you kick yourself for not doing it, but you don't wipe, and your healer isn't dying.
It definitely it's your motivation. People
Yeah.
want to do big damage, and they know that if that cast goes off, they can just get healed through it. But if they know that if they don't kick it, they're going to lose damage, they will fucking kick that thing more
Yeah.
often.
But I mean, okay, good.
Well, I was gonna say that it would be weird because like damage downs are kind of like a personal thing in Final Fantasy. Like if you make a personal mistake, you get a damage down for a bit. How this would work in the game is I'm saying it like there's almost like a demo shout that'll go off and it has to be kicked. And if anyone misses one, everyone gets punished for it. You'd almost have to make like an individual check somehow be damage down related somehow. And I don't really know how you'd accomplish that, but yeah, I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that would be the more effective way of dealing with it, because with the interrupt situation, like it again, like I swear I feel like it's not that DPS don't want to interrupt or they're not prioritizing the interrupt. It's more that that people are stepping on top of each other's foot. Like people are just overlapping kicks. If they see some damage down that it's about to go off, and you just have like 4 kicks go off at once on that one mob, and then it's like, oh well, we don't have a kick for that mob on the next cast, and we're just forced to accept this damage down.
I'm
But I
telling
do
you,
think
man.
it would be much better if it was like personal.
Just like how there's the
Lost.
ping system now, everyone just needs to get used to marking. And you need to just get a little mouse over macro, and everyone, you just get used to marking a mob every pack as you're running up to it, as that's the one you're gonna kick, and you can. It's like the easiest form of communication. It sounds like it's really annoying, but it's actually so easy to get used to. If that's one thing I could do to the WoW community, I could just wave a magic wand and fix problems. Oh, okay. I would probably just think much more important than solving kicks. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, but like if it would just be everyone having just tried that one time, realizing how easy it is, and then everyone just commits to marking their own target, we would be living in utopia.
Ooh, how about this? How about what if each mob cast, or not only for like specific stuff, like say there's like an important mob. What if that mob casting on like a certain player, and that player is the only one that's able to kick it?
Okay. So it's almost
like,
like
it kinda
the
like-
game. The game separates your kicks.
The game marks it for
you.
you, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. You go up to a pack and there's 5 mobs in this pack, and somehow something random will determine that like you are only going to be able. You'll see 5 cast bars, but one of them will be incredibly obvious that that's the one that you can kick, and potentially
Yeah,
other
nobody else
people
can kick
cannot.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you'd get a reward maybe for doing. There's that. That is a. It's kind
That
of
would
a
be fun
really.
gameplay.
It's a broad departure from how they've designed dungeons so far, and it's a pretty big leap. But it would be a way to build that into the game and have people not have to worry about that. But it would make chain pulling probably gone forever if that's kind of the design, right? Because how do you deal with only one person being able to kick two different mobs now that you've pulled 2 packs and both of those kicks are relevant? But I mean, I guess that's already an issue, right? You already can't really chain pull anything.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I mean, that's kind of what they've already done with Warbound. Like, you kind of can't pull multiple packs if there's like, how. So that's like another thing too of the interview. Morgan Day was talking about like these doors that other MMOs have, but it feels like they've been designing a lot of doors in Dragonflight and War Within dungeons. Not like hard doors, but kind of like just fucking brick walls. Kind of like what they did with Staghorns in Mist of Tyrannus Life, right? Like, you're telling me if you go into that final pole or that final area of Mist and you encounter a Staghorn, that's not a fucking door. Like, that's a goddamn door, man. Like, you are not going past that door. Like, that Staghorn is a goddamn brick.
Maybe that's why he brought
you-
that up in the interview. Maybe that's what he was saying. Like, all these other games have doors,
Oh,
so
like,
we're
So
adding.
we're just gonna do that
So,
too.
so
Yeah.
we want you guys to pull one thing at a time too, right? I guess he added the caveat of like, well, better players will learn how to pull multiple things at a time. I guess the context of that is you're saying better players are finding it extremely hard to pull more things at a time in this expansion.
Yeah.
As like almost a direct result. So.
And it's tough, right?
Yeah.
Because like the baseline pulls being that hard means that the worst players who would normally do 1 pull at a time already are now going to be doing effectively 2 pulls at a time, but it's disguised as 1 pull at a
The
time.
way you've tried to reduce pulling is by doubling the amount of mechanics, but what
Right.
that has done, even if it has successfully reduced the double pulling, it has made the single pack that people were already pulling much more challenging, right? And those are not the people that
Yep.
maybe needed to be challenged significantly more in dungeons. So everyone's to leave it at this kind of before we go, everyone is definitely looking forward to seeing how the season plays out. I think there's so many questions in Season 1 Mythic Plus. How does the more like mid-core casual community react to Mythic Plus this season with it being a little bit more challenging? Hasn't done it on beta. How are high keys going to work out without a push week? How long are you guys going to just farm high keys with no affixes and it's the same shit every single week before that gets boring, right? That's something that all of us have like concern for. Like, I think there's so many things that we'll learn in the first like month or two of this expansion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I think is like the biggest takeaway from this interview is they seem very willing to quickly adapt and change, and like whatever we have right now is not set in stone. Like what Morgan Day was saying about the Challenger's Peril or whatever. Like, if that turns out to be crappy, then we'll just make it reduced timer instead or something different.
They've pretty handily been in the we'll change it if people don't like it camp as soon as they heard that we didn't like Mythic Plus, and then completely remade all of it for the expansion in like 2 weeks, which we did
That
get
to me
confirmed
is-
it was 2 weeks.
That to me is the most important thing, right? Like I'm pretty happy with them experimenting with any of these variables in M+, as long as they are ready to not have us sit with it for 2 years if it's bad. Which, obviously there's been some expansions in the past where that's kind of happened.
You would have hope for that because
Yeah, exactly. Like
At least for the
I'm
beginning of this-
optimistic.
Yeah, at the beginning of this expansion, I'm expecting another record number of tuning changes every week, just like there was at the beginning of Dragonflight. You know what might happen again when they're making the next expansion is that might taper off in Season 2 and Season 3. But in Season 1, I expect it to be exactly like it was in Dragonflight. Constant dungeon changes, class changes. So I think the first season is going to be really good. So, and they have already shown that they'll change stuff if we don't like it.
You know what would be crazy is if next week DK just gets a raid buff. Imagine that. Morgan Day, I know you're listening to this right now. Just please make sure you do that.
I don't think they will. I don't.
That'd be crazy.
I think when we were like, we talked about the shaman raid buff before, and we're like, what do you mean? Because they said shamans don't need a raid buff, and then our criticism was like, not only do shamans need a raid buff, why do paladins have 2? And then we were like, it makes no sense that enhanced are the only shaman raid buff. Next week they're like, yeah, we get it. Okay, all shaman specs get a raid buff, and also paladins, you guys have 2. I don't know why you're going back down to 1, right? But like, I don't think the DK thing in the interview got communicated very well.
Translated,
I
yeah.
don't think, and it's probably my fault. I'm not very good at interviews, but like that, I don't think it was understood what I was saying.
I do think it's a little bit less like indisputable than the shaman paladin thing was. Like, I think the reasonable people could more disagree
Absolutely.
with the DK
True.
one than they could with the
In
Shaman
fact,
Paladin
I
one.
used to not even argue the DK one. When I was making my crusade for Shamans getting a raid buff this whole expansion, I didn't include DKs. I wasn't like Shamans and DKs. I was like, DKs, you all shut the fuck up because like you have some shit that Shamans don't even have. So like whatever. But now that Shamans have it, DKs are like the low-hanging fruit where it's like, okay, well now, and after DKs, there would genuinely not be another class that needs one, right? It actually is like the
It'd
last
probably be
class.
Evoker or something next that we would start talking about. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like Dev.
Man, Max fucking hates DKs, I guess. First AMZ, and now I'm gonna give a
Dude,
fuck
that
about
was
raid
so
buffs.
funny.
That was
That was
good.
so funny that like the reason I brought that up today should have only been a positive for DK. It was like DKs strongly feel about this. Why do DPS DKs not have the same value as blood DKs in a raid? That is something that is talked about a lot. I spoke with DKs earlier this month. That was a concern all three of them had. But it was funny that like in a comical as possible resolution to this was actually them not buffing DPS DK, but them nerfing blood DK, and then the response I would get from that would be insane.
That'd be crazy.
Yeah, I really hope that does not happen. I made it clear that that's not what I wanted, but okay. Okay, so I think that's all for the interview. And I guess before we get onto the Patreon question, this is it, guys. This is Dragonflight is Ogre. This is the last time we will be podcasting in the era of Dragonflight. Are you guys excited?
All right, well, real quick, final ratings for Dragonflight and on a tier list, all that stuff. Yeah, what do you guys think? This is the last time we're playing Dragonflight.
So solid
Classic,
A tier for me.
Okay.
It was a good expansion. It was not perfect, but I think it was really good. Set a really good baseline as well. Like a lot of the changes that Dragonflight made are sticking with us going out of it, which I really appreciate as well.
Yeah, Dragonflight's a tough one. I also want to point out that I think, and this is true of us, we're not above this, and I think it's certainly true of all WoW players, that like your opinion of an expansion almost always is more positive over time. WoW players really struggle with like recency bias most of the time. They're like, something's really bad. You can see how much more positive BFA is now, especially since like that came out. Like I remember BFA was like the end of the world, and then now people are like, oh, BFA was actually great, right? I don't think this expansion could be S tier because they weren't being ambitious, and it was never the goal of the expansion. But you can't like the times in this game that have been S tier to me recently are like the end of Legion, the end of BFA, right? Those times. But it took the expansion being actively bad for a long time for that to be possible by working up to the point and all of those systems finally working together to give you something like Season 4 BFA, right? This expansion was never trying to do that, and it was like kind of impossible for it to ever be at that point. But because of that, the overall quality of the expansion throughout was much higher. It started out in a significantly better spot than Legion, BFA, or Shadowlands did, absolutely. And I think for an expansion that they labeled as evergreen, it kind of took the whole expansion and the whole beta cycle to do it. But I think the talent trees ended up turning out really, really good. I think the hero talent trees will probably go through also an expansion long iterating for them to be really good in the War Within as well, right? I think this is something that isn't going to be good right away, or great, I guess. I think I would agree with Dratnos. I would give Dragonflight an A for what it's trying to do, right? What do you think, Dorki?
That's kind of surprising. Now I feel bad. I was gonna put it at B. And I was
That's
like, no,
fine.
like
I was debating between A and B, not A and S.
Yeah,
okay, yeah, because I mean, I definitely enjoyed a lot of moments in this expansion, and I played a crap ton of Dragonflight, but it definitely doesn't hit the same as Legion or BFA to me, which were by far like the highs.
I would have Legion alone in the
yeah.
S tier personally.
Yeah, like Legion was like by far the best expansion. I don't think it's even close. So like, I just can't put Dragonflight in the same tier as those two. And I do think like this was a huge healing expansion. That's what I've always called it. It recovered from all the pain points that were present in the past 2, maybe even 3 expansions. So it definitely like received some bonus
it
points.
absolutely
but
left the game in a better point going forward
Right.
at the end of Dragonflight than it did at the beginning. Like and that was the goal, right?
Yeah, and there are definitely like a couple of pain points in this expansion, so I definitely can't put it as high. Particularly like stuff like God Comp and Augmentation, and just like generally the game is not as exciting as the previous ones. Maybe like partially because of like lore, partially because of theme, partially because of the whole borrowed power thing.
Yeah, that's
overall,
something we
it'd be-
can talk about next week, I think, too. Because if we do one next Friday, which we can talk about here, actually, when our new upload schedule is going to be, because we did actually set this one specifically because of the beta cycle. But something we could talk about next week is like, is there room for some borrowed power in an expansion, right? Like, for example, you probably don't do this evergreen thing forever, right? That's how that would turn out how like PoE is now, which like no flame on PoE, but like part of the issue with PoE is it's hard to get into it because there's so many different things that are all happening at one time. That's what happens when you just keep a lot of the things that you put into your game that are good, and people love it who's played it for a long time. But like it's harder for new people. Like I don't think you can keep doing evergreen expansions, and I think there's a world where like you go back to something like that. I just don't know. This isn't something. I don't want to delve into this now, but we'll delve. Look at that. Delve into this now.
delve.
We can go into this I think next week, but I do think it's something worth exploring for sure.
I agree. Yeah, I would love to revisit this as well, like when we're looking back in a couple of years, see how our thoughts have changed about the Dragonflight era, like they did because I think BFA, for instance, really grew in people's memories afterwards, but Shadowlands hasn't yet, for instance, or I don't think it will.
Yeah, it's like, do you like? Is the beginning of the expansion when most people are playing it worth the pain and suffering of everything not working at all for the end of it to just be fucking awesome? Because that's what happens multiple times. That seems to be the trade-off that has to exist. Like, obviously, the perfect world, could you do an evergreen beginning and then just come up with some cook-up corruption for the last season and just let us have fun for a little bit? And it's not like a full expansion thing, but it's like, I don't know. The whole thing, we can get into it, but... Okay, is it at Patreon time?
It is, and this piece comes from Stylin, who says, something that doesn't get talked about enough. What is your opinions on pre-expansion beta reworks versus mid-expansion reworks? Right now, classes in the beta cycle, mages, monks, DKs, shamans, paladins, hunters, are looking great and got lots of feedback with Season 4 being slow. But classes like DH Priest, in all caps, Rogue, are struggling because their changes were mid-season. Sure, some of them were like that, were like the best, but their tune-ups were around current tier sets, seasonal balances, and play experience. Now that Dragonflight is ending, these classes just feel very bad because tier and Dragonflight is ending. It's worry because sure, they might hit reworks in the next big update, but it'll be what tier sets they have and seasonal benefits are around. With Season 1 and the longer time it takes to upgrade these classes, people won't be on the PTR to test the changes, and Blizzard will just release them in a state where they will need a rework after the expansion ends. Do you think Blizzard should push updates to all classes before an expansion launch? Also, make sure Max says Priest at least 20 times. Only way we will get meaningful feedback. Poddy Chow.
Oh, it's the priest complainer again.
Yeah.
I mean, I did say this about tier sets last time. Like, I've always found that a problem with tier set, where like sometimes they just completely involve a playstyle around a specific tier set and it goes away, and then like it just suffers really hard. I think like Havoc's the perfect example of that. But yeah, you guys.
Yeah.
I don't have a ton. I talk about this all the time. Like the whole Havoc and Rogue were sitting real high in Season 3 when they were the only thing getting reworked, and then they were super OP, and it wasn't kind of boring last expansion that when things were getting that like rework, you kind of knew they were going to be the shit in the patch, or at least in the near future. It was true with God Comp. All of God Comp got reworked into that. It was true of the meta classes in almost every season, for Raid at least. I don't know. There's probably some better way to do that. It did feel kind of weird that like everyone this beta cycle got like all these crazy buffs except for like the 3 people who got them at the end of Season 3, and it makes sense that they were the last ones they got to, but it definitely feels bad that they didn't get to them at all. Those 3 classes, at least I know, are the classes that are the most upset. They're the ones that like they might be good, but their class is just like definitely less fun to play. So I hear you. As far as the original question, what's your opinion on pre-expansion beta reworks versus mid-expansion? I don't fucking know, man. Like I don't know if it matters when that happens as far as like them getting feedback. Right now it's like a rotating thing. If there's any hope maybe is like in the future, because hero talent won't be that controversial. It's more class and spec trees. I think what we've seen in the last 2 years with class and spec trees, that's the iteration on them is going to slow down significantly in the next 2 years, right? I think that has to be true. So
Wait, why?
I don't know. They're less new. You need to.
They're more done,
like,
right? They're more.
like,
They've got them in a more permanent state.
Correct. There's multiple points in this last expansion where they realize something, right? Oh, you can't have utility nodes in the offensive spec trees for DPS classes. Oh, 2-point nodes are bad. 1-point nodes good. And then you saw them, and it took time because it's an insane amount of shit to go through and like do that for all of the things, right? Like, I don't think because they were just introduced in Dragonflight and they're not going anywhere, I just think over the next 2 years, starting right now, there will just need to be significantly less iteration than there were. I think they're more complete and permanent now than they were at the beginning of Dragonflight. I don't think they're going to be as different leaving the War Within as they are right now, I guess.
I do think there will be a continued cycle of like the oldest ones will be the next ones to get the touch. It reminds me of you guys know the Golden Gate Bridge, a beautiful feature near me that is actually constantly being painted. They made it without galvanized steel, which is pretty bad when you have a bridge near saltwater, so the paint is always corroding off. So the paint crew goes from one side of the bridge to the other, and by the time they get to the other end of the bridge, they got to go back to the start because it's time for a new coat of paint over there. So they're just constantly going across the bridge, repainting it 24/7, 365. It's always ongoing. That's not 24/7, but
that is crazy. I didn't know that, and
that's
that's also an excellent analogy for the factories.
Yeah, that's but I do think it'll slow down a little bit in pace. Like I don't think they'll necessarily go through all 39 specs every 2 years going forward, but I would expect it to still be something like every 3, every 4 years.
Even if it doesn't slow down in pace, I think it will slow down in importance.
Yeah, and scope as well, for sure.
What a rework means going into Season 3 of Dragonflight, what a rework means going into the beta of the War Within, I think is just significantly less impactful than what that will mean going forward.
Yeah. I do think, though, they're still discovering stuff. Like, for instance, the Monk class tree, they did a really good thing at the bottom of that class tree where it's like they're actually a bunch of kind of interesting, cool utility nodes that aren't actually throughput, and you can sort of pick and choose if you want, the roll dash thing, those kind of stuff. And I could see them going through and making more trees more like that.
Yeah, but that's nowhere close to
the one-pointers.
We had, and this number's not made up for a spec in the game, we have 13 2-point nodes, and now we have 0. Yeah. Meaning that in a lot of cases, you've actually just gained 10 spec points, and now they have to balance this, and now there's a bunch of new balancing problems. Like that is, I don't think that will ever happen again. Like, I think that is pretty much done as soon as they've done that to every class, and I don't think there'll be anything as impactful as that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I was like thinking that they would still do smaller reworks here and there, just like change up how certain nodes work, or like change up how some talents work entirely, because they have done that with different specs. Like I know Pharaoh Druid, a lot of
they have to do that with tier
isn't as different. Yeah, like make it interact with certain tier a lot more, because that's how they change up gameplay, right? Otherwise you're kind of just like stuck playing the same types of elements.
or it's why tier in my opinion is a good thing. If you come up with a really cool idea with the tier bonus and it actually makes your class more fun to play, just without question put it in your spec tree somewhere. Take the worst, most boring, not cool thing in your spec tree, get rid of that, put that in, balance it, and have that kind of gameplay still be available if you want it. I think that is just the easiest slam dunk thing that tier and talent trees interactions should be going forward.
Yeah, I will say like one concern I do have that I didn't think would be as big of a problem is the hero trees. Like the hero trees, like I know you guys were saying how like it's not much for them to work on, but they've been pretty not balanced, and I don't know if that'll be fixed by the time Raid's out.
Yeah, no shit. Do you remember how bad Dragonflight here, like class and spec trees were at the beginning of Dragonflight? In 2 years, these hero talents will be unrecognizably less dog shit than they are right now.
Well, but I mean, like, there's so much less to work on with the hero trees. Like, the fact that they're not even, like, close right now is kind of bad.
Relatively less, yeah. I don't think that's true with every class. It does seem like most classes have, like, one that's way... Like, I don't think there's a lot of classes that have this. Or, let's say specs, not classes. I have 2 hero talents to pick from, and both of them are cool, and they're both close in throughput to each other, and there's a reason I would play one than the other. That is rare. It can be both are good, and one of them is super not fun or cool at all or fun to play. It could be that both of them are really cool, but one of them is actually really horrible and the other one's amazing. You know, there's not a lot of people that have it like really, really good. And I think it kind of has to be. I wonder if it'll be easier to balance when like we have logs from Heroic Week, where it's like you look at like a single target boss breakdown, you look at a Nexus Princess, and instead of looking at Marksman Hunter and then all the other specs, it'll be like Sentinel marks and Dark Ranger marks. And then you can actually see the difference between the multiple hero talents people are playing. And then that should be a lot easier, I think, for Blizzard to see what people are playing and how far off the balance is on them. And then until we get that, I think it's going to be pretty rough. And for this tier, for this like Race to World First, for example, I'm not expecting it to be very well made at all.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, how many specs are there right now that actually are happy with how both trees are? Because at least I know for tanks, like they're like maybe Brewmaster Monk is kind of close, but the rest are like pretty off balance by a lot.
Brewmaster likes Shadowpan?
Yeah,
They buffed it a
a
lot.
lot of Shadowpan,
Yeah.
and Shadowpan's like a pretty solid option now. Like maybe it's not cool, but like in terms of like performance,
It's
is.
also like designed really, really, really shit. Yeah, but
It's kind of, there's an appealing part about it where it's like it's much more easy to forget about the fact that you have it talented, which for a spec with as much going on as Brewmaster, I
Yeah,
do
that's
think
not
is
bad.
upside for some people. Yeah.
you could have that for a lot of classes. There are classes in the game that are like, what would be really cool with my hero talent is if it does not add more for me to think about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which I think Shadowpan definitely does more than the other one.
Yeah, because like right now it certainly feels very similar to the Covenant situation where it's like, all right, everyone's just gonna play this Covenant.
Yeah. I suspect, I mean, I think it will be rare that there will be mythic bosses where it's not at least like 90-10 in favor of, you know, a given
The better
talent,
one.
hero talent for like every spec that is played on that fight.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's going to be a best one.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if they're 0.5% different, there will be one that you saw your favorite player in this guild play, and then you're going to play it. Right.
Which again, that wouldn't necessarily even represent a failure of the hero talent system inherently, but if
That's
they could
just how
make
the
that
game
not
works.
true, that would be giga success, right? That would be like a crazy dub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know. Did we really answer this question? I don't know.
Nope,
It's kind of
not at all.
like what are your opinions versus?
Is it better to be the beta
rework?
rework class or the mid expansion
Who
rework
fucking
class?
knows?
It's
Okay,
probably
okay.
better to be the beta rework class,
Yeah,
right?
I would
Like,
say beta one. Yeah, I
if
would
you-
say
if you had
beta
to
one.
Well, the
pick-
mid expansion one means you're immediately going to be OP for
That's
the
true.
next.
But you're OP in
Next.
the middle of the expansion when you've already quit playing because you're mad because you weren't reworked going into the expansion. So, you know. But yeah, you're right. Those ones were the ones that were like just historic levels of OP. Like the 10 specs or whatever that got reworked through Dragonflight, 9 out of 10 of them were like super broken OP, and the other one was Ret, which was still really good and just got nerfed 4 times before it came out somehow.
Yeah.
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 All
All
right.
right.
That's it for this expansion. We will see you next expansion. This reminds me of do you guys know the really annoying people such as myself on New Year's Eve where you'd say like
I
see you
knew
next
that
year
you
to
were gonna
people?
mention that.
Yeah, that's me right now
see you
with
next
expansions.
expansion.
That's right. See you next expansion,
Yeah.
everybody. Ha ha ha. Padios.
Adios. Merry
Adios.
Christmas.